A snobbish chief flight attendant, eager to impress a wealthy passenger, kicks a poorly dressed man out of first class, assuming he doesn't belong there. The man turns out to be Keanu Reeves, whose quiet humility exposes the crew's arrogance and prejudice. The incident becomes a harsh lesson about judging by appearances, leaving the airline to face public backlash and the staff to face their own shame. One of the reasons short videos of Keanu Reeves keep circulating online is that they rarely show anything spectacular. It's often something small. He gives up his seat on a crowded subway, waits patiently in the rain while fans take turns with a camera, or stands back on a red carpet so that the people around him fit better in the frame. The clips are grainy, a little shaky, sometimes filmed from too far away. We don't know the full story around them, and yet people pause, watch, and share. They say, "Look at this. This is how he is." What they mean usually is, for a moment, the distance between famous and ordinary seems to disappear, and we are reminded of a simple idea: that kindness can be quiet, unperformed, almost invisible. Most of the time, when we think about decency, we think of these big names. We attach it to someone the world already knows. But the feeling we're really responding to doesn't depend on a movie career or headlines. It's something much smaller, closer, and more common than that. It lives in people who will never be recognized in public, whose names will never trend, whose kindness slips past unnoticed except by the few who happen to be there when it unfolds. This is a story about one of those people. If you were standing in the bus terminal on the west side of the city that Thursday morning, you might not have paid attention to him at all. He blended into the place the way the benches and vending machines did, part of the background of other people's days. Just a man in a navy blue work jacket with the Transit Authority logo stitched over the pocket, pushing a mop and a yellow bucket down the long, tiled corridor, moving with the slow, practiced rhythm of someone who knows that his work will be undone by the next wave of dirty shoes and rolling luggage. His name is Miguel Alvarez. He is 58 years old. For the past 16 years, he has worked the early shift as a custodian at the terminal. Before that, he did nights at a hospital. He lives in a small one-bedroom apartment 3 bus stops away, alone since his wife died 8 years ago, with a fern by the window and a radio on the kitchen counter that plays the news at low volume most of the day. His son and daughter live in other states. They call on Sundays. Miguel is not in a hurry. His job doesn't really allow for it. There are schedules and checklists, and there is the soft understanding that no schedule survives contact with the public. Spilled coffee, a broken bottle, snow tracked in from the street. These things come when they come. The work is to meet them without fuss. That Thursday, the air outside was below freezing. People came in from the street with red ears, those who had gloves folding their hands into their armpits, those who didn't shoving them deep in pockets. The automatic doors hissed open and shut, sending little gusts of cold air into the waiting hall. A woman at the newsstand straightened mountain ranges of bottled water. The man at the ticket window tapped the keyboard with 2 fingers, barely looking up as the line of customers shifted forward. It was, in other words, an ordinary morning. If there is any mystery to what happened that day, it is that it might have disappeared completely. No drama, no shouting, no rush of people gathering with their phones held high. If not for the fact that later, a few seconds of security camera footage would be watched more carefully than usual. But at the time, as Miguel rinsed his mop in gray, soapy water, he had no idea any camera was pointed in his direction at all. Miguel has seen those Keanu Reeves clips. Not all of them, he doesn't spend much time on the internet. But a few years ago, his daughter had visited, scrolling through her phone on his couch, laughing, and turned the screen toward him. "Look at this," she said. It was the one on the subway, Keanu in a black beanie and jacket, standing near the door, holding a bag. The train is crowded. A woman walks in, swaying a little, holding a large, awkward package. Without any ceremony, without even looking at her for more than a second, he stands, gestures to his seat, and takes a step back. That's it. The clip is less than 10 seconds. Miguel had watched, then shrugged in that way people sometimes do when they see something that feels right but unremarkable. "He just did what you're supposed to do," he said. But he watched it a second time when his daughter replayed it, and he noticed the small things. The way Keanu held the ceiling bar a little tighter when the train started, making room, not crowding the woman as she sat. The way his eyes didn't flick toward the camera once, as if he didn't know or didn't care that he was being filmed. Over time, that short video, and a couple of others like it, stayed somewhere in Miguel's mind, less as a story about a movie star and more as a quiet standard. If someone with all the attention in the world on him could still give up a seat without thinking about it too hard, what excuse did the rest of them have? The bus terminal had its own rhythms of courtesy and indifference. Some mornings were full of people in a rush dragging suitcases, snapping at each other. Other mornings, there were soft conversations between strangers over shared outlets and phone chargers. Miguel had seen people help each other up when they fell, give a bottle of water to a crying child, return a wallet to the information desk. He had also seen people walk around someone dropped to the floor, headphones in, eyes fixed ahead. That morning around 9 a.m., as the snow outside began to turn to a light, dirty slush, a woman in her late 60s stepped up to the window. Her name, though Miguel did not know it then, was Ellen Walker. She held a worn leather purse in one hand and a printout tucked into the other. Her coat was a little too thin for the weather, the kind of coat someone wears because it's the one they own, not because it suits the season. Miguel was mopping near the far end of the hall when he first noticed her. Not because of anything unusual, just because of the way she kept glancing down at the paper and then up at the electronic board overhead, as if the two things were refusing to match. At the window, the ticket clerk, his name tag said D. Harris, asked without looking up, "Where to?" Ellen slid the paper under the glass. "I already bought this," she said. Her voice had the soft flatness of the Midwest with the strain of someone not used to making demands. "I just need to know which gate." Harris looked at the paper, typed something into his terminal, and frowned. "This is for yesterday." Ellen blinked. "No, dear, that can't be right. My sister's appointment is today. I bought it for today." There was a slight tremor in her hands now, though whether from the cold or from something else, Miguel couldn't tell from where he stood. "Departure date." Harris turned the paper and tapped the printed line, reading aloud in a monotone. "March 10th, 9:30 a.m. That was yesterday. You missed it." I think I must have, I thought." She stopped, pressed her fingers to her forehead, as if trying to rewind the last few days. "Is there another bus to Columbus this morning?" "There's one at 11:20, Harris said. "But you'll have to buy a new ticket. This one's already used in the system." "I can't just change it," Ellen asked. "I didn't write it. She hesitated. "I had to be at the doctor. I came straight after." Harris's shoulders rolled back a fraction, the subtle flinch of someone bracing for an argument they had had 100 times. "I get that, ma'am, but the system doesn't show reasons, just dates. Ticket S expired." He glanced briefly at the growing line behind her. "Next, please." She didn't move. "How much is another one?" she asked. He tapped the keys again. 42.50. "Oh," she opened her purse and began counting bills, fanning them out in trembling fingers. A 10. Another 10. A 5. A few ones. Her thumb lingered on each bill as if trying to make it multiply. "I have 31, she said quietly. I thought I already paid." "There's an $18 change fee if you want to reuse the old ticket toward the new one," Harris said, sounding for a moment like he was trying. "So then it'd be $29.50, plus the difference in fare. You'd still be short." "How short?" she asked. He sighed, $11 and some change. The line behind her shifted. Someone exhaled loudly. A man 2 people back looked at his watch and muttered under his breath. Harris glanced again at Ellen, then at the line. "Ma'am, I've got to keep this moving. If you don't have enough, I can't issue the ticket. I'm sorry." The words "I'm sorry" were correct, but mechanically delivered. Miguel, watching from his post, recognized them as the kind of sorry that belonged to the policy, not the person. Ellen swallowed, nodded in a small defeated motion, and stepped aside. She moved to a nearby plastic chair and sat slowly, the paper ticket held between her fingers. She didn't cry. She just stared at the floor, then unfolded the bills on her lap again, as if maybe she had miscounted and $11 would appear by sheer force of willing the numbers to change. Miguel turned back to his work, pushing the mop along the tiles, rinsing it in the bucket. He had his own math that lived in the back of his head. Rent due on the 1st, how much was left after groceries and utilities, what it meant when the bus pass price went up again. On his way out the door that morning, he had checked his wallet, three 20s and a half-folded 5, set aside mentally for the week's groceries. He knew exactly how far those dollars had to stretch. He also knew from years of watching that situations like this usually went one of a few ways. Sometimes someone in line behind would step forward and say, "I'll cover it," pulling out a card with a small flourish, the kind that some part of them might hope would be noticed. Other times, a manager would be called, a rule bent, an exception made. More often, the person short on cash would quietly leave, their trip undone by a number on a screen. He watched the line. No one stepped forward. The manager remained in an office across the hall, door closed, eyes on a computer. Ellen sat alone, lips moving now, whispering numbers that didn't change. Miguel finished the section he was mopping, parked the bucket near the pillar, and leaned the mop against it. His knees ached a little as he straightened, an ache that had become familiar, like an extra layer of clothing he had learned to wear without thinking. He wiped his hands on his work pants and walked slowly toward the ticket window. He did not have a plan. What he had was a feeling in his chest that felt, in that moment, heavier than the small space in his wallet where the 320s rested. At the window, Harris had already moved on through several other customers. When the current one stepped away with a printed ticket, Miguel stepped into the small gap before the next person could advance. Harris looked up, mildly annoyed, then recognized him and relaxed a little. "Hey, Miguel, something wrong with the floor." Miguel shook his head. His English was steady but simple, shaped by decades of speaking it every day at work but rarely stretching it into complicated shapes. "No, floor is fine," he said. He glanced toward Ellen, then back at Harris. "The lady, the one with the Columbus ticket, she needs $11 more." Harris hesitated, checked the screen. "Yeah, 11.23. Miguel nodded slowly. "Can you put it on my card?" he asked. He took his wallet from his pocket, opened it, and pulled out a faded debit card, its numbers worn from years of use. "You don't have to do that," Harris said automatically, lowering his voice. Miguel gave a half shrug. "I know, but she needs to go, right?" He said it almost as a statement more than a question, as if the logic was too straightforward to argue with. "Please, just add it. Quiet, okay." For a second, Harris looked at him the way someone looks at an unexpected kindness, as if trying to understand where it is coming from and whether they are allowed to accept it. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said. He entered a few commands, swiped Miguel's card through the reader, and the small machine beeped. The amount was not large. It was, in simple numerical terms, less than many people in that terminal would spend on coffee and snacks that day. But for Miguel, it was the difference between his usual groceries and a week of slightly thinner meals. Miguel didn't do that math out loud. He just waited for the screen to clear. Then he stepped back, intending to return to his mop. "Hey," Harris called after him, a little louder than Miguel had hoped for. "Ma'am, Mrs. Walker, is it?" He waved Ellen forward. "You're all set. We got the change fee covered. You've got a seat on the 11.20. Ellen looked up confused. I don't understand. I don't have." "It's taken care of," Harris said, nodding toward Miguel before Miguel could take another step. "He covered the rest." Ellen's eyes followed the tilt of his head and landed on Miguel. For a second, she looked as if she might be angry, her pride stung at the idea of being seen as a charity case. Then that expression softened into something else, something like relief tangled with gratitude, and something that might have been embarrassment, but was too overcome by her need for help to fully take root. She stood, walked over to Miguel, and placed her hand lightly on his arm. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. Miguel smiled, a small, almost apologetic curve of his lips. "It's okay," he said. "You need to go, Columbus, right?" "My sister's at the hospital there," Ellen said. "I got the dates mixed up. I don't know what I was thinking. They said she shouldn't be alone for the test." Her eyes glistened. She blinked quickly, unwilling to let the tears fall in public if she could help it. "Thank you, really." He nodded again, uncomfortable with prolonged attention. "You just take care of your sister," he said. "That's all." She started to reach into her purse, as if searching for something to give him in return, then stopped, realizing she had nothing but the crumpled bills that still wouldn't have been enough for the ticket if not for him. She squeezed his arm once more, then turned back to the window to complete the transaction. Miguel went back to his bucket, picked up the mop, and continued down the corridor. The whole exchange had taken less than 3 minutes. It is worth pausing here to notice what did not happen. No one applauded. No one in the line stepped forward to add a contribution or slap Miguel on the back. A few people in the immediate vicinity looked over when Harris raised his voice, then returned to their phones and conversations. A young man near the end of the line noticed just enough to raise his eyebrows in faint surprise before bending down to adjust the strap on his backpack. Somewhere, a child cried because a candy bar had been denied. A loudspeaker crackled, announcing a revised departure time for a bus to Chicago. Life flowed on. The kindness was small enough to be carried along without disturbing the current. In the security office overlooking the terminal, a monitor paused, rewound, and played the 3 minutes back again that afternoon. The person watching was a guard named Jason Miller, assigned to review footage from that morning after a passenger complaint about a missing bag. He scanned through the feeds on fast forward, looking for a man in a red jacket described in the report. In the upper left corner of one screen, he happened to see Miguel step away from his mop and approach the ticket window. For a moment, he thought nothing of it, then noticed Ellen's posture shift from slump to upright, saw the small movement of her hand on Miguel's arm. He slowed the footage, watched the scene again. There was no sound attached to these cameras, just silent figures moving through a slightly distorted fisheye frame. Miguel's gesture looked even smaller without the words, just a man in a blue jacket taking out a card, sliding it across the counter. Ellen's shoulders lifted, then fell. Her head tilted toward him. It was nothing, and at the same time, it was everything that mattered about the exchange. Jason sat back in his chair. He had been doing this job long enough to feel a kind of numbness toward what he saw on the screens. Arguments, minor scuffles, lost children reunited with parents, the occasional theft. Things played out in front of the lens and slipped away. But this 3-minute segment stuck. There was something about the way Miguel's body language showed no flourish, no awareness, almost no self at all in the act. He didn't look around to see who might be watching. He didn't wait near Ellen to receive further thanks. He stepped in, did what he could, and then stepped back out. Later on his break, Jason mentioned it to his supervisor. "You know that custodian, Miguel?" he asked. "I saw him cover a ticket for a lady this morning, out of his own pocket, I think." His supervisor looked up from a stack of reports. "Yeah, that sounds like him." He smiled a little. "He's always doing things like that. Brought in extra gloves last winter, left them out by the benches with a note saying, 'Take one if you're cold.' He didn't even write his name on it. I only found out because I saw the same brand of gloves sticking out of his coat pocket." Jason nodded, turning the paper cup of coffee in his hands. "It's just, I don't know. You don't see that on these screens too often, not like that." If this were the kind of story that chased large, cinematic moments, this might be the place where a local news crew showed up, microphone in hand, asking Miguel how it felt to be a hero. Someone might start a fundraising page to reward him, and people online would post comments about restoring their faith in humanity. But nothing like that happened. The footage remained in the digital archive for 30 days, then was automatically overwritten by newer recordings. No one outside the terminal staff, and the few passengers who saw it in person ever knew. Miguel, for his part, did not talk about it at home that night. When his son called that Sunday, he asked about the grandchildren, about the weather in Texas, about whether his father was remembering to keep the bathroom heater off when he wasn't using it. Miguel said yes. He was fine, yes. The knees hurt a little in the cold, but that was to be expected. No, he didn't need any money. He did not mention that his grocery list that week was a little shorter. Rice, beans, eggs, a small bag of apples instead of the larger one. It was a small adjustment. He had known tighter weeks. On the other side of the story, Ellen arrived in Columbus just after 2 in the afternoon. She took a connecting city bus to the hospital where her sister waited. The test they were worried about turned out, thankfully, not to be as dire as they had feared. She stayed the night on a reclining chair at the side of the hospital bed, holding her sister's hand when nurses came in with needles and charts. At one point in the quiet of the early morning, her sister asked, "You made it okay?" "I was so sure the weather would mess up the roads." Ellen smiled faintly. "I almost didn't," she said. "I got the dates wrong at the station, but there was this man," she trailed off, realizing she did not know his name. Just a man who helped, she finished. I don't think I would have gotten here without him. Months later, when she told the story to a friend over coffee back home, the details blurred a little. She remembered the feeling of panic at the ticket window, the tightness in her chest, the taste of the fear that she might not make it in time. She remembered the relief, the warmth in her throat when she realized she could go after all. She did not remember the exact amount he had paid. She couldn't recall the logo on his jacket. What stayed with her was the look on his face, open, steady, unembarrassed by her need. We talk so much about these celebrities doing nice things, she said to her friend. You know that actor, what's his name? The one who's supposed to be really kind, Reeves. Keanu, her friend supplied. Yes, him, Ellen smiled. They say he sits with the crew instead of hiding away, that he gives up his seat on the train, that he's normal. I think that matters. But that man at the bus station, he did the same sort of thing, just on a quieter scale. No cameras, no one asking him for autographs. Her friend stirred her tea. Maybe that's the point, she said. Maybe there are people like that everywhere, we just don't notice them because no one films them. Back in his apartment, Miguel moved through his routines. He woke at 4:30, sat for a moment on the edge of his bed, listening to his joints complain and quiet. He made coffee in a small metal pot, toasted a single slice of bread, and turned on the radio. Sometimes, in between traffic reports and weather updates, the station played short entertainment news segments. Once, driving to the grocery store with the radio still on, Miguel heard a story about Keanu Reeves giving a large amount of money to hospital staff who had cared for someone close to him, the announcer's voice lilting with approval. Miguel doesn't follow celebrity news closely, but when that name comes up, he listens a little more carefully. He likes the way the stories describe a person who tries to be decent even when no one expects him to be. You see, his daughter had said during that earlier visit, showing him the subway video. He doesn't act like he's better than anybody. Miguel had nodded then, and he nods again, alone in his kitchen, thinking not about movie premieres or headlines, but about a younger version of himself, newly arrived in this country, lost in a train station, trying to read signs in a language that still felt like marbles in his mouth. He remembers an older woman who had walked with him to the right platform, writing the bus number on a slip of paper for him. She had not spoken Spanish. The kindness had traveled across the gap anyway. There is a thread that runs through these stories, from the crowded subway car to the bus terminal, from the famous actor to the custodian sweeping the floor. It is not a thread of spectacle or heroism, but of something much humbler, the willingness to see another person's difficulty as one's own concern, even for a moment, and to act on it without needing anything in return. When people share those Keanu Reeves clips, you can almost hear the underlying question in their comments. If someone like him can still be gentle, why can't more of us? The truth is that many of us are. There are people like Miguel in bus stations, in hospital corridors, at school cafeterias, in grocery store aisles. They are the ones who stop to help a stranger with a heavy bag, who cover a small debt, who sit a few extra minutes with someone who looks like they don't want to be alone. Most of the time, no camera is rolling. No one uploads the footage to remind the world that such acts exist. They happen and then dissolve into the flow of ordinary days, remembered only by the people whose paths were changed by them. The woman who made it to her sister's bedside, the guard who saw something different on his screen, the clerk who was reminded that he could bend, if not the rules, then at least his distance from the people on the other side of the glass. There is comfort, perhaps, in knowing that the goodness we celebrate in people who are known does not begin or end with them. It is reflected, echoed, and quietly multiplied in the lives of people like Miguel, whose names will never appear in credits but whose actions carry the same human meaning. In a world that often seems to reward noise and self-promotion, their quiet choices can feel almost invisible. Yet they are there, threading through our days, small and steady. If you stood again in that bus terminal on another winter morning, you might see Miguel at his work, pushing the yellow bucket, pausing to answer a question, gesturing toward a gate. You might not know just by looking what he has done for anyone. You might never know. But somewhere in the way he steps aside to let someone pass, in the way he listens fully when a confused traveler explains their situation, in the way he reaches into his own limited store of comfort to offer a piece of it to someone else, you would catch, if you looked closely, the same quiet kindness that moves people when they see it. whether in a famous face on a subway or in an ordinary man with a mop. And maybe that is the real mystery. Not that such goodness exists, but that so much of it does, unrecorded, unfolding all the time in the spaces between us.